My name is Maniza Naqvi, and this is the fourth part of the 28th episode of the Little Book Company podcast, which is focused on Razia Bhatti and Newsline Magazine. In this part, my guest is Tehmina Ahmed, who was a core founding member of Newsline Magazine and before that worked at the Dawn Group at its Herald Magazine publication with Razia Bhatti and her team. Tehmina was also one of the founding members of the Women's Action Forum, which was founded in 1981 to resist the draconian Hudud ordinance against women and was a violation of human rights by the military general Ziaul Haq. And I want to talk to you, first of all, welcome Tehmina.
Thank you.
Tell me about the Women's Action Forum before we talk about Newsline.
Yes, that's something that it first brought together various NGOs who were working on similar, similar questions really. And it started as a platform in which a lot of people came on an individual kind of basis of contact. And then we had also at that time, many of the NGOs and a lot of the people were working on, things like, better education and whatever. But I think what happened with Ziaul Haq and the government of the time trying to, in a way, shut down all kinds of dissent and promote a very narrow viewpoint of what they said Islam was about anyway. And then for myself, I just remember that I used to work in this agency and I was sitting there and then I was looking at a newspaper. In the newspaper, there was this guy called Israr Ahmed, whom you've probably heard from, this Maulana. Mm-hmm. And he was laying down the law and saying women shouldn't go out of the house and they shouldn't go to work and so and so. So I was really at that time I didn't have anything to do with, this kind of work, consciousness raising or activism. But I think for many of us, these laws, it became very obvious that there has to be a resistance. Otherwise, we'd really all be done for. Mm-hmm. And so I met some of the people who were already, at that time, they were representing different organizations like Tehreek-e-Niswa and others. And I found out we just had a lot in common. I started going to their larger meetings. And then they asked me to come on to their working committee, and I did that. And I think, I think some of my best friends date from that time. It was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun as well.
Mm-hmm. Of this group at Herald, which was mainly women, it seems, and that were working with Razia Bhatti and her team. She was the editor there. Were most of them members of WAF, of the Women's Action?
No, they weren't actually, no. Mm. I think what people in the media did was they did support us in the way that also at Star, the editor was Zora Yusuf at the time. Mm-hmm. And they published a lot of stuff that we wrote, actually. Mm-hmm. They started publishing, and I think it's the first time that Pakistani publications took on this kind of issue anyway. Mm-hmm. So, no, none of them formally members of the Women's Action Forum, but all of them kind of agreed with what it was trying to do and supported where they could.
Mm-hmm. And so, in a way, because they were sitting in Star and Herald, they would elevate and expand that voice.
Yes. And yes, you're right. The people who were working with Razia were mostly women. There was just one reporter, Zahid Hussain, and there was an editor for some time, Talat Aslam, and the rest were, Razia, and I think there were 4 other editors at the time, all women.
So let's fast forward from 1981, Women's Action Forum, and to your working at Herald Magazine, and team that Razia Bhatti was the editor of. And we should keep in mind that those were very tough times. Those were when, Ziaul Haq was very much in power. The space for free speech and for free anything was very narrow, if at all. Those were dark days.
Yep.
And
well, I was at the Herald very briefly because they had an editor at that time, Amine Azam Ali, who wanted to go on leave for, half a year or something and explore some projects somewhere. And so I was at that, I'd already left the agency and I was freelancing as an editor and, a contributor to various publications. And so Amine asked me to step in for her, and I did that. But after that, what happened was, I think it was just 2 or 3 months later, that Razia had a lot of differences with the management at Dawn and because they didn't want to, sort of create any trouble for themselves with the Ziaul Haq kind of business. And so they were trying to say, you can write about this, you can't write about that. And I think where it came to a head was that Benazir was coming back, and the Herald had a cover with Benazir on it. And the management got to know what was happening, and they tried to say, no, you can't just make another cover and, whatever. And so Razia was not the kind of person to, make any compromise with where her, her beliefs were concerned. And so she decided to leave. She resigned. And she resigned, and all of us who were there with her, I remember that day, there were 5 of us there, including Ambar Khairi, Saira Irshad, Rehana. Rehana was not there, actually, she was traveling. So Razia just picked up, she didn't take a thing from the office, she just picked up her handbag and she said, I'm going. And she walked out. And so we just walked out with her. And at that time, there was no...
remember the date?
Sorry?
You remember the date? What month?
It was, let's see, 88. 88 is right, yeah. 89, the magazine started publishing. 88 was the time. It was maybe it's somewhere in the summer of 88.
So about June of 88?
Could be, or it could be a few months earlier. Yeah, I should look up the exact date. So at that time, and we didn't really have any idea of, I mean, off and on, of course, Razia and her team had discussed the possibility of starting another publication, but it was not, there was nothing really worked out where that was concerned. But we started talking to people, and we found that there were some people who were interested. 1 or 2 people would come in as partners, and we could start with, a very small budget and just do things, just get going and see what happens. So it took us, I think, about a year. Yeah, therefore it must have been summer, because the first issue was then July
1989.
89, in July, yes.
So let's go back a little bit. That day, Razia comes back to the office. She's had a with the management, and they've told her she cannot publish this cover with Benazir on it. And she says, I'm leaving. And you, Saira Irshad, Amber Khairi, and maybe some others leave with her.
Yeah.
Where do you go? That day,
we went straight off to Razia's house, She had an apartment in Clifton. And so we just went there, had a cup of tea, and kind of where to go now, was the question. And at that time, Razia thought that maybe this is not a feasible idea. She said, okay, let's look into it, but I don't know if it'll really work. But then what happened was there are a couple of people who joined us, not as, editorial or whatever staff, but because they wanted to support the idea. There were a couple of people who did that. And I think that was then very encouraging. And we started, basically, we rented a room in the Metropole Hotel, which at that time had some offices also. So we had this one room, and we brought in chairs and a table, and we brought in some teacups, and we just got started, going through all the formalities, the paperwork, etc. And then, of course, Zia has, at that, very soon after, this whole thing happened, got blown up, which meant that there were less obstacles to, registering publications, and things opened up to just a coincidence on the media. And so we got to the point where we had this first issue ready.
And so now the first issue does have Benazir Bhutto on it because she's become Prime Minister.
Absolutely, yeah.
How did that feel?
Oh, it felt very good. I mean, it was very exciting to be doing something like that, It was Razia's dream, actually, and I think it came true.
It was Razia's dream to have a magazine like this.
An independent publication, so you were not, you didn't have people trying to tell you do this, do that kind of thing, change your approach.
And how could you possibly manage without advertising?
Well, actually, we got some advertising for the first issue, not a lot, but we got enough to barely cover, the costs of production. And I think that was the place we were in for 30 years because there was never money to spare as such. So it was just, okay, let's do one more issue, let's do one more year, let's see how far we can keep this going. And in the early years, the advertising was a little better, actually. And then because there were changes in the media, I think, and things started kind of traveling, most of the, money and the ads just went from print to, the new channels. So it became a bit challenging that way. But I think, we managed because we just kind of, even the contributors were people who were supportive. They weren't asking us for a lot of money, and they didn't mind a wait of a month or two if we didn't have the money to pay them. So, but they were all with us. They liked what we were doing.
And so now you had moved from the Metropole to an office in Clifton by the time you came?
Gee, there was a place, I think it's still there, this place called Sand Haven in Clifton. And there were small offices. There were like 2 rooms. The one that we had was 2 rooms, and there was a little corridor kind of space, which set up the computer. We had a couple of computers. And we were the first. It's interesting that we were the first to use kind of do a digital design, because Apple was still very new in those days. So in the Herald, we used to, cut and paste things to make up pages, and it was all very manual. So
you
we
must
had
had a Macintosh.
I'm sorry?
You must have had a Macintosh computer, right?
We had a Macintosh. Yeah, we had a Macintosh, yes.
And so was there one Macintosh in the office, or there were several?
There were 2, and nobody had a laptop. I don't think any of us had a laptop. And some of us had never actually worked on a computer, because in the Herald at that time and in other publications, you had people who did things for you, would type up things, make corrections. And this manual process of cutting headlines and pasting, and the whole thing was very, very, kind of slow, the process. So that for us changed right at the beginning.
So that slow process, do you think that there was something about that was special and created a different kind of thinking? Just the way of cutting and pasting and actually having to write with your own hands?
I don't really think so, because that's what everybody was doing and everybody was used to at the time. But we had one of the people, one of our partners, was very keen on, using media which would become available at that point. So I guess that's how we did it. We had one designer, we had the group that had left the Herald, and then we had contributors, some people writing for us regularly from, we couldn't afford to have people on salary in every place, but there were people who would write in from Balochistan, write in from the frontier. Some of the best people like Rahimullah Yusufzai from the frontier. And they were very kind, really.
And was that because they had a real affinity to the team at Herald and to Razia and Rihanna?
Yeah, that was very much there. And then they also just were for a free press, really, and so and some a kind of independence. And I think we were the only independent publication at the time. Um, and I don't know if there have been many others. There was Viewpoint long ago and Outlook long ago, but I can't think of anything else.
That's correct. And what was it about Razia that made a group of people leave their jobs and walk out of the room with her?
Well, she was a remarkable person, actually, and she was an amazing, amazing editor. So it was really, I mean, you felt like somebody really did you this big favor to put you into this position that you could work with Razia and learn, because I think I learned everything I know about editing by that first year. She worked very closely with the team, and she was a person who was always, you learned by observation. She wouldn't kind of lay down the law too much, because she didn't believe in pushing people, but she knew how to develop people. And I think for myself, I can say that really, I mean, without any doubt, my editorial work owes a lot to Razia Bhatti.
And it must have taken remarkable courage at that time, because not only before August 1988 there was General Zia, but after 1988 and before that too, for that whole decade, the context of Karachi was one party that pretty much used its muscle against anyone who criticized it.
Yes, we had some run-ins with the MQM. And I mean, strangely enough, it wasn't just the MQM. When the PPP came into power, we had some problems with some people there as well. But as far as the MQM is concerned, Altaf Hussain in this speech and this protest or whatever they were up to, criticized Newsline by name, saying that, what do these women know? They're drinking mineral water and their influences are all from the West, and who do they think they are, etc. But they never did try to, nobody really turned up at Newsline, the office. Later on, we would get some visits, or at least some calls from intelligence agencies sometime. But yeah, it was very tricky time to be doing that kind of work.
And during the time, so from let's say July 1988 to 1996, Razia was, running Newsline.
Yeah.
In this period, there was a lot of change as well. There was Benazir Bhutto's government and Nawaz Sharif's government, and then Benazir Bhutto's government.
Yeah.
Was she able to function without any issues during this time? Or the team?
Yes. Yeah. I don't think we really had too many problems that way.
And that's because there was a democratic government in place. And there was freedom of speech to an extent.
Yes, to a large extent. Um, hmm. It was a very exciting time, and there was a lot to write about. There was a lot to cover, a lot to think about.
Mm-hmm. What were you writing about?
Well, I did a lot of editing actually once Newsline got started, because one of the earlier editors who had been at the Herald for a long time with Razia, that was Tehmina Ibrahim, well, some things happening in her personal life, so she couldn't really continue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Saira as well was away for a year or something, or maybe more than a year. She was in the US and she had, two small children and some things to do there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Rehana Hakim had also, she got married and she went off to Canada for, again, it was about a year. So there's a lot of work for the people who are still around. And Razia was quite a perfectionist, so you couldn't get by with, slipshod kind of work. So the editing took a lot of time, but I wrote initially when I was writing for Dawn and Star, it was really mostly gender and women's issues and development.
Mm-hmm.
But when Newsline started, I'm also actually a photographer myself and a documentary filmmaker, which I became actually while I was at Newsline. I was also doing art and culture, I was doing photography shows and stuff like that.
So you're a photographer and a documentary filmmaker?
Gee, that started at Newsline actually. What they did was that for two reasons. One, since everybody's running to that kind of audiovisual media, then, maybe the people who don't read anymore, maybe you can reach them through that. And the other thing was we thought it may help us make a little money and so close the gaps. And so they were, Nazia Sayed Ali, I don't know if you know her at all. She was one of our editors, not one of the core group, but she had joined. She was a very good editor. She was part of the group. So she had, I think, some experience at Dawn or something when they had a channel. So she took that over. It was called Newsline Films. And so she was managing that for a couple of years, and then she decided to go back to print.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stepped in because it had always been an interest, and I thought an audiovisual, kind of work would be interesting to do. So in addition to editing, I was running that Newsline Films for, I think, maybe 7 years or something, or a little more.
This was before, in the first 6 years of Newsline? In the 90s?
No, this was after Razia, actually.
Yes, I would imagine you need
Yeah,
you have
yeah,
internet and the web for the documentary side of
yeah,
it.
yeah. So yeah, it started quite a bit later, actually.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in that period, when Razia was alive and well and at the Newsline offices, and now it's running without Saira Irshad there and without Rehana Hakim. Tell me about that atmosphere. Who else was there? There was yourself. Uh,
Myself, actually, Ambar Khairi, I was there for the first year.
uh-huh.
Then she got married and migrated to the UK.
Uh-huh.
So that was another kind of gap there.
Uh-huh.
So we had Naziha for one. She was a good editor. She was reliable, very skilled, and picked up on, whatever Razia's kind of approach was. She picked up on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people came back. Ambar actually didn't get back. Because her husband was kind of UK based, and so
Mm-hmm.
she stayed on. Saira came back,
Mm-hmm.
and Rihanna also came back. Actually, she quit Canada after maybe a year or something.
Mm-hmm.
So some people on the old team came back.
Mm-hmm. And what was the atmosphere like that in the office? This is just
Well,
different.
wherever Razia was, there was whether it's Herald or Newsline or wherever, she attracted this particular kind of person, So she had this huge crowd of, in that 2 rooms, kind of walking in, walking out, everybody from Ardashir Kawashi to I.A. Rahman to you just name it, they were all around. And Razia would have these, long conversations about various things. But I think she was also, on a personal level, a very giving person, a very open person, and very loving, really. So her relationships were very strong in that way. And the atmosphere, everybody was very, very excited. We were young enough, I suppose. We had the energy. And so it was just one big party with Razia, actually. Lots of good food. She believed in that. Lots of chocolate cake going around.
What kind of a chocolate cake?
Well, all kinds. And these people, at least when we were in the Herald, would all bring things to eat for lunch. And then you had this communal lunch with all kinds of nice food. Yeah.
And it was Razia's warmth that just made the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so do you think it was her warmth that was the special, secret sauce that had people just, gravitate towards her?
Yeah, I think that was a big part of it. I mean, there was a lot of intellect. She was a true intellectual in many ways. But that was not something that she would, kind of make a big thing or a show about. And she was interested. Well, she was a good journalist because she was just interested in whatever was happening with people, with issues. And she had this kind of huge, things she was interested in. Was a really huge spectrum of things.
So art all the way to politics, to science.
Yeah.
Or anything. She was just a very curious person.
Yeah.
And fearless.
Oh, absolutely. If she rejected something, it would be either because it couldn't be backed up properly, or she had some doubts about, she didn't publish any exaggeration either, So it was all, I think, fairly balanced coverage. It was not one-sided in any way.
And the people who were there were not necessarily people who started as journalists. Did you have people there that went on to do other things, theater, poetry? You went on documentaries.
I think most of them did start as journalists, and they started with Razia, as a matter of fact. She was their first editor. Not Rehana, because Rehana had worked for one of the papers at that time that was there. But Saira Shad, Ambar Khairi, myself, Sabina Ibrahim, I think we began any kind of, some of us, like I did a lot of freelance writing, but to a kind of focus on journalism, all of us started with Razia, really.
We have about 10 minutes, Tehmina. Speak about Razia some more, about her just day-to-day, behavior, her attitude. Is there a story that you remember that stands out in your mind of her sticking to principles? Well, she stuck to principles at all times.
Yeah, she did completely. And I think the people who were writing, the contributors, kind of, got to know what she really, the depth that she wanted to see in their writing. And I think it's not just the editors, a lot of writers also improved by working with her, with feedback that they got. And she was just, completely dedicated. She had 2 small children. And when they wanted to see her, and if they couldn't get to see her otherwise, they would come to the office, to the Newsline office, and, kind of. Sarah, her daughter, was young enough that she would come and sit in her lap for a bit, and then she'd go home. And sometimes we would find Razia's Bobby was traveling from her flat and coming to Newsline to find out what she wanted to get done. And of course, Gul Hamid Bhatti, her husband, he would also come in and chat for a bit. She had one strange habit, which I think a lot of the others acquired and I didn't, which was that they would start work a little late, late afternoon, big lunch, etc. And then they would start really getting down to it by around 5 o'clock in the evening. And then when you had to close the issue, they would work all night. Razia would work all night. She would stay at the office, work all night. And, I was at that time, I think, too old to change my, ways to that extent. So I would just bring them halwa puri in the morning. I would get a call saying we're through for this issue, and then I'd bring them halwa puri, which had breakfast at 6 in the morning, and then everybody would disappear and rest, and a few days later they'd be back.
Well, it seems like that's also a pattern with the other companies in Karachi, that people get started late and then they stay late. Just maybe that's just the rhythm of the city, maybe, that nights are better than the days. I think Hanif wrote a script called Raat Chali Jhoom Ke.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, I don't know why I just thought of that.
Yeah, Hanif and Nafisa Shah were people who had, Hanif had some experience, I think a little bit of experience. He had done different kinds of interviews. And Nafisa was just out of school. And Hassan Mujtaba had worked with other publications, but I think, the way he focused on, and he had a huge amount of knowledge actually about culture and traditions in Sindh. And he wrote probably some of his best pieces for us in Newsline. And Nafisa turned out to be a very good investigative reporter, and so did Naziha Ghazali, later Naziha Sayyid Ali. And Hanif stayed on. With the first 7 years, he was very much there. And he backed up Razia a lot, because he was always there for the halwa puri breakfast in the morning when I went there.
Razia shaped him?
Oh, completely. He had what it takes, that is something, I think there's a kind of talent sometimes that's kind of inborn almost, but it needs a catalyst. And I think for both Hanif and Nafisa, Razia was the catalyst.
They're very lucky.
Very lucky.
My understanding of Karachi and politics in Pakistan comes from really the Herald, reading the Herald and Newsline through the 80s, and particularly through that period when 1986 through 96. And it shaped my thinking as well. I didn't work with you, but I read you guys.
Yeah. It's an interesting, sort of documentation of the times, I think, the whole Newsline era, in a sense, in Pakistani journalism. And the sad part is that somehow we could never really get the business part together. I think we're just not, that financial know-how was missing, although we had a couple of people on the board who were people with that kind of experience. But somehow there was a lack of, kind of almost a lack of interest there, I would say. Razia wouldn't want to ever look at figures, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, and our business director was Tehmina Ibrahim, who's also one of the old Herald crowd. And she did a lot in the beginning, but I think there was, you have to have this cut and dried business mind. I think that was just missing from the whole kind of experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, and of course, the media changed. That was the other thing that happened.
So the media changed. Let's hold that thought for a moment and take a pause.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So Razia didn't want to look at numbers, didn't want to look at the business side of this.
I don't think she could have, she just didn't have the mind for it. She couldn't focus on, things like advertising, revenue, and blah, blah, and, how to get more people to. We did have a guy who was I think Tehmina was the business director and he was the business manager or something, and he was quite sharp. I think for the first few years, he did manage to do enough to keep us going, but then it just became difficult because everything became, your production costs just went up and up and up, and the revenues were not there to match really. So, but I think those Razia years, from what I recall, were not that bad. I think the turning point came a little later. And we had people who would work with us for very little money, actually. We were all working for very little money. But it's a different thing when you own something. And so, you invest your own energy, time, and everything. But even the people who joined us later, people like Hanif, people like Nafisa, Hassan Mushtaba, Rahimullah Sahab, nobody made a fuss about money. They were like, okay, this is what you can afford, that's fine. But then after some time, the kind of things started piling up. And we didn't, Rehana also is a very good journalist, but also not really a business person. I don't think there was anybody there, unfortunately, who was a business person. I had a little bit of background because I had done advertising work, although I was a writer there, really wasn't a business part of the deal. So for some years, I did manage to make a little money out of the documentary, and then we plowed that back into the magazine. But it just became harder and harder. Unfortunately, we had to think of,
Maybe
some kind of anxiety.
yeah. Could it be that this business called truth isn't a business?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. It's more of a belief, really.
And a duty and a responsibility, and
Mm.
requires something else entirely. But this team of people, and also in other places, they are made to swim in the same sphere as if they're a corporation or a company, and they're not a commodity. They're not selling a commodity. They're amplifying the truth or trying to get at it.
Yes, I think that's a very good definition.
And so someone else or everybody who is a citizen needs to step up to the plate and do their part, do their duty, do their responsibility to keep things going. Would you agree?
True. Oh, absolutely.
And in this case, this was a journalist-owned magazine.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a great struggle.
It was actually, when looking back on it, at the time, it didn't, I don't know, I think those of us who had either been there from the beginning or had taken a little break and come back, I don't know, we couldn't look at another option for ourselves, really, because with all the hard work and, not enough money coming in to take any kind of a decent salary and whatever, all the rest of it. But I think it's not just, having this kind of a mission. It wasn't just that. I think the group had such good energy, between the people. And we enjoyed the work so much because there's a lot of very tedious work as well, which, anybody who's been an editor or a writer knows, ironing out other people's bad language. They had good content, but bad language. So we had to do a lot of rewriting.
Yeah.
So with all that, but I don't think somehow we, once you were in that deep, looking at other options becomes difficult.
And it's not like you all grew up together. You didn't go to school together. You weren't buddies. You weren't part of, your parents didn't know each other. You didn't all, have that kind of connection. You all came together because of writing and working at the Herald or Star and then at Newsline.
Yep. I think Sarah and Tehmina were the only two people who had known each other, and their families were kind of not connected, but very good friends. So, but for the rest of us, I first met Razia when I was freelancing and did a couple of pieces for the Herald. But I knew about her just like everybody knew about her, but I had never met her really. And same thing for Rehana and Ambar and I hadn't met either. So we all got to know each other there.
So the common thing, if you were to give it a name, what would it be that was so common between all of you?
I think, it's sounds like a bit of a cliche, but I think we all believed in a free press, and we all believed that, not to kind of your motive would not be to promote one point of view or to bring down somebody who didn't have your point of view, but to be dispassionate really, and then provide kind of access to people who were interested in looking at issues in depth, more than newspaper headlines or channel news, and who had that kind of interest. So to give them that option that they could, read a magazine that took that kind of trouble to bring, to provide a kind of platform, actually.
You use the word dispassionate, and yet here I am thinking that this is a room full of very passionate people.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you come to, this is Razia, when you come to weigh really whatever somebody's writing, somebody's work, and to see that there isn't, any kind of prejudice there really, and then no exaggeration, just say it the way it is.
Unvarnished.
Yeah, I think that's what we all had in common. And we really believe that this could be done and that it should be done.
Tehmina Ahmed, thank you so much for talking to me today.
You're most welcome.
Bye for now.
Bye.